QNH sources for IFR approach plates, RAIM checks, GNSS approach substitution, and LNAV+V, how to use it, and the cautions. All that and more coming right up. So strap in and let's get into it.
Standby star 9000, 1013, Kilo 25. Coordinating Aileron and rudder, bank, balance, bank pressure rolling to 30 degrees. That's 30 degrees there. Somewhere 291, 631.
G'day everyone and welcome to episode 95 of the Flight Training Australia podcast, the podcast all about flight training and flying in Australia and beyond. I'm your host, Trent Robinson. Thank you for joining me wherever you are. Well, it's been a while since I've done a bit of an IFR episode, and certainly from the training again that I've been doing, the testing, and just talking to people in general, I am still seeing some confusion on some of the new rules or procedures. And even if it's not new, it's just a bit of, I don't know, a few funny little ideas creeping in and things are being cross-pollinated. So applied correctly, it's correct, but most likely it's not, and it is leading to confusion. So I thought to help null these problems and settle the arguments and stop people failing for no reason, let's dig right into it and talk about a few of these topics. Now, some of these things have been subtle changes and others have been around for some time. But like I said, people are getting a bit confused. So I thought the first one is a nice, easy, gentle one to start with. And we'll talk about QNH sources. Now, remember, a lot of the things you used to find in the AIP have now moved to the Part 91 Manual of Standards, both the CASR Part 91 and the MOS Part 91. And we can jump right in there. So if you get your Part 91 open, or you can use the plain English guide, but you'll have to hunt around for where this has all been divvied up to if you use that. But Chapter 14, and the bit in general we want to talk about is 14.03, and that's Instrument Approaches QNH Sources. Now, there shouldn't be anything new in this particular section for you. It is showing that the aerodrome, well, let's read it in full, hey? So before passing the IAF, or the Instrument Approach Fix, the pilot in command must set one of the following. A, the actual aerodrome QNH from one of the following approved sources. And we've got ATC, ATIS, AWIS, and Certified Air Ground Operator there. Or B, the forecast aerodrome QNH. What's a forecast aerodrome QNH? It's a TAF. Again, I wish they would just put TAF there, but there can be a variance on that. But for us, that's a TAF. Or C, the forecast area QNH. So nothing new there, I hope. You should be doing that already. And of course, if we're using a TAF QNH, we can use the published minima on the plate. If we are using an actual QNH from an ATIS, AWIS, or from air traffic control, which is going to have an ATIS or an AWIS there, then we can take 100 feet off the minima. If we are using area QNH, then we must add 50 feet. All right. So that's all written there. And of course, the actual QNH must be obtained within 15 minutes. Now, the interesting thing with the 15 minutes is that is if we're going to use an actual QNH being from an ATIS or an AWIS, you can only use it within 15 minutes. So you typically want to have gotten that by the time you're either commencing the approach or about to leave the holding pattern. And that way you should be well and truly within your time frame. Now, that applies for an actual QNH. But interesting enough, I had a situation the other day where we were flying along and the QNH that was set on the altimeter was about 1 hectopascal out from what the TAF said. And sure enough, when I questioned a student, he said that the QNH was off the TAF, which they got before the flight. So it was good 2-3 hours old by now. So just remember as well, use that 15-minute rule for everything. Like, have you checked for the latest TAF within the last 15 minutes? Because otherwise you could be using out-of-date TAF information. And again, you might get away with it on a day-to-day flight, but if it's on a check flight, OPC, IPC, or anything like that, the QNH will be incorrect. You would have done a beautiful approach to an incorrect minima and fail, which would really, really suck. All right. So if we have a look at Chapter 11, Air Traffic Services Prescribed Requirements, and this fits with the Chapter 11.02, Transition Altitude, Transition Layer, and Transition Level section. And this is just talking about if you're going to fly at the transition level, either 10,000 or 11,000, i.e. flight level 110, there's minimum QNH settings. So we have to have at least 1013. If it's anything less than that, then there won't be roughly 1,000 foot safety buffer between those two levels. So you might find you're not allowed to fly at that level and you have to go higher. Anyway, that's not the bit I want to read about. The bit I want is item 5. And what that says is the current local QNH, either an accurate QNH as defined earlier, or a forecast QNH of the station along the route within 100 nautical miles of the aircraft, or the current forecast area QNH. And this is a bit that people get a bit confused with. So I've had it said plenty of times, both here and in Perth and plenty of other places, that we're within 100 miles of Darwin. So I'm going to use the Darwin QNH and apply that to the instrument approach for where I am. And I'm like, no, you cannot do that. Okay, so this section makes it very, very clear. The destination aerodrome for where the approach serves, you must be using a QNH from that location. You cannot apply a QNH from within 100 miles away and apply that to your instrument approach plate. Unless, and this is the kicker, unless you apply it as an area QNH. That's what that's saying. All right. So, for example, if you're going in to a location and center tells you that the area QNH is 1017, but somewhere within 100 miles of your destination is a TAF, an AWIS, or anything else that might have 1015, then you can use that. But it is still treated as an area QNH. Okay? So hopefully that makes sense and that's all nice and clear now. If you're still not sure, go and have another read and that will sort all that out for you. And if you still can't figure it out, give me a call or have a listen to this bit again. Right. Okay. RAIM checks. So RAIM is Receiver Autonomous Integrity Monitoring. It's a independent check by the GPS receiver itself to ensure that there are enough satellites available in view to perform the functions that you're wanting it to do, depending on the type it is. Now, historically, we've only ever had TSO 129 GPS receivers, and it was common practice to get in the airplane and plug in either the airport or waypoint or the missed approach point and confirm that you've got RAIM check at that time, and that'll be plus or minus 15 minutes either side of that time, that you're going to have sufficient RAIM, i.e. sufficient satellites to perform the function. It's not going to drop out on you. Now, since that rule, we've moved along and we've now got TSO 145, 146 GPSs and more, all right? But that's pretty much what everyone listening is going to have accessible to them. And we can have a look at Chapter 14.06 in Part 91. Or Section 1406. Is it chapter? Let's just check here. Yeah, Chapter 1406. So make sure I'm using the right terminology. And it says that before the departure of a flight is planned to conduct an approach that requires the use of GNSS at the planned destination aerodrome or alternate aerodrome, the pilot in command must obtain a prediction for GNSS integrity. All right, so that's pretty straightforward. I think everyone knows that. So if a continuous loss of GNSS integrity for more than 5 minutes is predicted at any time of the approach, we need to revise the flight plan. So all that simply means is you've got to get there quicker or you've got to get there after the outage so that you're not going to have a problem. And that's pretty straightforward. Now, why is that a problem? Well, because you won't go into approach mode, essentially, and that sort of plays into the next little bit. So item 3, the pilot in command of a flight that is navigating with SBAS-capable receivers, which is satellite-based augmentation systems, must regularly check for the availability of GNSS integrity indication in areas where SBAS is not available. So SBAS is things we've got WAS or WAS, WAAS coming into play. Now, it's not available in Australia. If you have a look at the diagrams, it's like a funny extra loopy ABC logo, like the TV channel, and it doesn't quite reach Australia. All right, but we will be having other elements of that come into play. So we need to keep an eye on it. However, item 4, the pilot in command of an aircraft whose approved GNSS can achieve LNAV accuracy of less than 0.3 using requisite GNSS satellites may disregard sections 1 and 2. So that means that you don't need to get a prediction for GNSS integrity beforehand, and you don't need to worry about the 5 minutes or outage. Now, the reason for that is because the receiver itself is not going to go into a restricted mode. Now, it does say requisite GNSS satellites. And if we go right in the front to section 107, we can find all our definitions. And there we will see that a requisite GNSS satellite means at least the number of satellites serviceable the profile requires for the approved GNSS specification. So as we know, that essentially means your 6 for a TSO 145.46 GPS and 5 for standard RAIM on a TSO 129 GPS. All right, it's getting very wordy, isn't it? But item 4, if you've got a GPS that comes less than 0.3. So what that means is, remember, terminal mode is either 5 or 2 miles. 129 GPS is 5. A TSO 145.46 is 2 miles en route. En route mode changes to terminal mode within 30 miles of either the destination or arrival aerodrome. Destination or arrival, that's the same thing, isn't it? Destination or departure aerodrome. There we go. Okay, so it's 30 miles either end, then the en route bit in the middle, and that's 1 mile for terminal. Then we come down to approach mode. Now, again, when I was a boy, they had APR, which is the approach mode for a TSO 129 GPS. And that's all that existed. There was nothing else. But now they have LNAV, LNAV+V, LNAV+VNAV, and LPV, and all these other amazing abilities and extra approach requirements that you can get. So because of LNAV, it actually scales, if you watch, down to 0.3 with, when does it do this? Well, first of all, let's back up. When does it tell you LNAV? It goes into the approach mode, LNAV, at the intermediate waypoint on a GNSS approach, or any other intermediate waypoint, and this is feeding into our GNSS approach substitution, which we'll talk about shortly. All right, and then you have the, well, I've got to remember where I'm up to. The 0.3 will start at 2 miles to the final approach fix. By the final approach fix, it would have reached 0.3. And then after that, if it's a 145 or 146 GPS, it will come down to 0.1 of a mile. So it's really getting tight. And you may have realized that you weren't that far off track, but all of a sudden the needle's really hard to keep in the center. Well, you probably find you're in a 145/46 GPS and or GNSS receiver, and the tolerance is getting much, much tighter. Now, because of that, it's not going to go into that unless this receiver's done its own predictive RAIM check. So that's why we don't need to do one before the approach. If you've got an old style 129 GPS, then you do. Now, how do you know which one's which? Well, as I've always said, unfortunately, it doesn't tell you on the boot up screen. You have to go into the aircraft POH. If it's a brand new airplane, it'll pretty much be a 145 or 46. But if it's an older one, you need to go to the back into the supplements, and there should be the installation information of your particular GNSS unit. and it will tell you there. But you can't just say because it's a Garmin 430 that it's a 145 or 146. Right? I had one Garmin 430s right when they first came out. Yes, kids, I was there. All right. But they were all 129s. All right. They are able to have software updates. Some of them, some aren't. They're good for the bin. But you need to make sure that it has the appropriate RNAV protocols. Otherwise, when you put your flight plan in, it's all going to be incorrect as the actual navigation tolerances you're flying towards. So if it does have 5 miles en route or APR, then it's 100% a 129 GPS, which means you need to be using it in conjunction with the terrestrial-based nav aid. All right. How's that going so far? Brain's fried already. All right. So in keeping with our GNSS theme, GNSS Approach Substitution. Now, this is one that is quite unique because I don't think many other places do this. And it is interesting when you read it because I remember when I first read it and I thought, what? This just doesn't make sense. I can do a GPS approach for a VOR and NDB, but I can't for a GNSS arrival. I thought, well, that's like less hard. Why not? Well, let's have a look at what's going on here. So again, chapter 14.04 is GNSS arrivals and DME or GNSS arrivals. Part 1. During a GNSS arrival or a DME or GNSS arrival, so it's basically a DGA, the pilot in command must A, use the destination VOR or NDB to provide the primary track guidance. All right, so what that means is the GPS can't be used. You can't have direct to the NDB or the VOR. It must be in the VOR mode or you must be using the ADF azimuth. And this is reinforced by the note underneath. GNSS cannot be used to substitute for the VOR or NDB. See subsection 14.05.1a, which is basically saying the ground-based NAID is the VOR or the NDB. And I'll explain why in a sec. If there is a significant disparity between the track guidance provided by the destination VOR NDB and the GNSS track indication, discontinue the arrival procedure. All right. And then it goes on to say what the divergence is, which I just don't know how you're going to measure. Anyway, what's the issue? If I go direct to the NDB, surely that's more accurate than tracking off an actual azimuth NDB signal. And for the most part, I would agree with you. However, you need to come back to what I just told you. Let's use a VOR because it's a bit easier to understand. A VOR funnels in. It's like a cone on the radial. The further out we are, the less sensitive it is. The closer to the station, the more sensitive it is, like a tunnel. Okay, but it's like a cone shape. So as you get down closer and closer, it gets far more sensitive. Now, if you go direct to the VOR, doesn't matter which one, especially outside of a flight plan, you could be in en route mode. Because remember, unless we're actually following a sequence of waypoints within a flight plan, you aren't in the mode it doesn't know where you are. Even though you've told it you're within 30 miles of an airport, it might show you that. It will typically go into en route mode. Well, there's certainly a risk of it. If it doesn't, it'll be in terminal mode, which means it's going to be parallel left to right 1 mile CDI. Now, if you think about that, we can be up to half a mile off track. If you come all the way down your approach and your half scale deflection, having a bad day because you didn't allow for the wind or something, you could be half a mile left or right of the airport, which is not cool. Okay, so this is why you cannot use the GPS because it doesn't know it needs to go to the sort of sensitivities it does on an RMP approach. So next, then, we get into 14.05, which is the use of GNSS as a substitute or an alternative to ground-based navigation aids. And this essentially is applying to the VOR, the DME, NDB, outer and middle markers. All right. However, as I just said, does not apply to the GNSS arrival, the DGA. All right. So what it says is the GNSS may be used as a substitute or alternative to ground-based navigation aid for the procedure or phase of a flight mentioned in item, of course, there's a table and it's not very easy to read. But what it's saying is the en route phase, a SID or a star, an initial, intermediate, or a missed approach segment or final approach segment. So it can fly the approaches. So what you can do here is you could load the NDB or the VOR approach, fly it off the CDI, and do the approach, right? But note what I just said then, load the approach. Now, I get people trying to load the approach all the time, especially for the ILS. And I keep saying, why are you doing that? Oh, for extra situational awareness. And funnily enough, we then enter a period of complete and utter lack of situational awareness and disorientation and the wrong nav aids dialed up and not talking to the DME and don't know where a final approach fix is, and it all goes to a mess. Now, I know some people are going to go, hang on a minute, and complain and argue. All right, but listen to what I say with everything else here, and then it'll start to make sense why this is a problem. You can't just fly the NDB or VOR like you would traditionally on the GPS needle direct to and whatever course or radial you need to fly, because you're going to be in the wrong mode. It's not going to have the sensitivities. So remember before when I said on the RMP approach, it's going to go into LNAV mode 2 miles or at the intermediate fix, and then 2 miles prior to the final approach fix, it will start to scale. It will do this for the NDB VOR approach as well, as long as you load it. All right. So you need to go into your procedure, load the approach, NDB or VOR. And as you do that, then it will give you a warning or disclaimer saying this is for a guide only. Now, this is pretty much because this is only available in Australia that I'm aware of. If anyone knows of it available or done anywhere else, let me know. But it's not monitored. This is an interesting thing. So these approaches that you are loading, they're not, you see the Auscal flights going around and doing these approaches. They're doing the traditional style, but they're not, to my knowledge, again, anyone let me know, but they are not flying these approaches loaded in the GPS to double check that everything works out the way nature intended. Okay. So do use these with caution, but they can be done. So you will load the approach and put it in. Now, it all looks fantastic. Look at this. So problem number one. If you're using JEPs, you probably won't notice this so much, but if you're using DAP plates or the Air Services plates, you're going to notice that the waypoints that have been loaded into the approach segment are segmented. They are a point to a point to a point to a point, and they don't necessarily match terminology on your instrument approach plate. So right away, there's a problem because you can't just look at it with the glance and remain orientated. So you've got to be careful there. Secondly, I'll use a VOR, for example. It will typically load the initial or intermediate approach fix, final approach fix, the missed approach fix, and maybe something upwind because of wherever the missed approach takes you. But it will probably not reference the DME. And this is certainly the problem here in Darwin, that you load the approach, but it doesn't reference the DME. Therefore, where is the top of descent? So nowhere is it referencing. The only way you could do this is if you have a second GPS referencing, in this case, the Darwin DME, or an actual DME. So you just need to be careful. These approaches can be flown. They're great. I've flown them myself, but this is a classic 61385 proficiency rule, general competency rule, that you need to understand all the quid pro quos and all the issues that can come up with this. Because if you just go and load it and expect it to, the GPS will do everything for me like it always does, it's not going to happen. Sorry. Okay. So just remember that. All right. So I strongly recommend having a bit of a read through there and checking all that out. Now, this then leads on to my final bit of LNAV+V. So if you go into an approach mode of LNAV+V, it's fantastic. It gives you this little receiver created glide slope, which I've discussed before. And it's fantastic. It goes up and it goes down, just like a 3D ILS approach. So point one, it is not a 3D approach. This is a receiver i.e. the GPS in your panel produced glide slope. So what's the problem with that? It's not integrity monitored. It's not checked by anything. All it's essentially done is plotted the heights for the descent and the distances and drawn a linear line through it, and it's created a glide slope and displays on your screen. So pretty cool, useful, gives you a little bit of confidence of where top of descent is, and that sort of goes up into infinity. So if you're coming in higher, that'll still work. You can come in on it and down you go. The problem is if you apply that glide slope the same way that you would an ILS, it's going to potentially get you into trouble. How so, you say? Well, again, we can be plus or minus half scale deflection on an approach plate in a test situation. Even in real life, if we go down low, stay within full scale deflection and come back up, right? The same problem. On an ILS, that's fine. And if you have a look at an ILS and then you have a look at a VOR or an RNAV approach or anything like that, RMP approach, there's going to be one difference. And that is that an ILS doesn't have MDAs, minimum descent altitudes, whereas a VOR and an RMP does. Now, what's the issue with that? Well, if you have a look at some approach plates, the descent path can come very, very close to some of those MDA steps. Right? I've seen some with a difference of 20 feet, all right, or 80 feet. So if you are within half scale deflection, normally that would be okay. But in this instance, it will actually put you below the minimum descent altitude. All right. In a flight test situation, that'd be a fail. In a real life situation, it's going to be reducing your obstacle clearance. All right. So whatever you're expecting to have, you won't. All right. So you can use the slope. You can be a little bit more relaxed, but the critical points where there's MDAs or check heights or anything, you should be still targeting those, cross-checking those, and make sure that you do not bust any MDAs as you come on down. All right. Otherwise, enjoy. It certainly makes life easier. All right. The GTN 650s and 750s, you can load visual approaches. They will also give you a nice 3-degree approach profile. You can set it for a 3-mile final and all these things and use all of that in visual conditions as well. Or just maybe when it's starting to get a little bit dim or hazy, smoky up here, it's handy just to give you a little bit of extra guidance for your approach, be it visual or instrument. But remember to understand all the ins and outs and all these little quirks that could catch you out. All right, so there we go. There's some IFR theory for you. Hopefully that is helpful, helps you understand things a little bit more and can help prepare you for your next IFR flight adventure or test, whatever's coming up. Alrighty, that is it for this episode. A little longer one, but hopefully full of great content. As always, please let me know if you have any questions. If you loved today, please tell all your friends, spread the word, let them all know about the podcast. Leave me a review on Spotify. You can leave independent or individual rather episode reviews on Apple Podcasts. You can leave me a 5 stars and written review there as well. I read them all and I really appreciate hearing from you. And if you're absolutely loving what you're hearing and you want to support my work, please consider joining me on Patreon. 3 levels of membership from $5 to $30, once a month payment, fully tax deductible membership, and there are at times exclusive member episodes and info posted that I don't post anywhere else, and everything that comes from there goes towards the production of this show and the YouTube channel, which will be getting back up and running very soon. All right, guys. Anything you want to know, all the information is in the episode description. Until next time, blue skies, clear skies, stay safe, and remember the golden rule. Aviate, navigate, communicate. See you next time. Cheers.